fighters. So if you're just listening to the audio, that was the voice of Pete Hegseth, the new Secretary of Defense, the DUI hire that we're all dealing with. He was talking about how the Biden administration was a total joke. And that was, of course, before the Signalgate story, our prime story for this evening, broke. We have a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about Signalgate, what consequences this will have for the administration, the campaign against Yemen, and Trump's wider plan for the Middle East. This is like the biggest scandal in years, and it's just getting started. Hello and welcome to State of Play on Mint Press News, your weekly Monday or Tuesday. We pushed it back to Tuesday because we wanted the story to develop a little bit more news stream where we discuss all the insanity that happened over the weekend. Because if you haven't been paying attention to the past 500 days, more than 500 days, it's where most of the clownish insanity goes down, and the administration spends the rest of the week doing damage control. And this weekend was a doozy. The press is already calling it Signalgate, harkening back to the infamous political scandal in 1972 under Nixon administration called Watergate, in case you weren't tracking American political history. On Monday, yesterday, March 24th, The Atlantic broke the story that journalist Jeffery Goldberg had been added to a Signal group chat with U.S. national security leaders discussing impending war plans for aerial combat operations against Houthi leadership in mid-March of this year. Classified information was discussed on an open source civilian messaging application. And while Signal is used by military leaders around the world, according to Signal's CEO, it is against the Pentagon's operational security protocols. And actually, we got a copy of these security protocols from NPR. They're unclassified, and they were sent out to everybody in the Pentagon being like, hey, Signal's compromised by Russian hacker groups, so let's not use it. And they were all using it. So using a Signal chat group to share highly classified information and accidentally including a reporter. I personally believe it was an accident. I'll explain my reasoning behind it, but you're free to disagree with me, and maybe we'll hash it out in the live Q&A section at the end of this. So again, accidentally including a reporter on the discussion could raise the possibility of violation of federal laws such as the Espionage Act. Let's be honest, though, there will be no accountability and they won't be tried. It can be a crime to mishandle, and here's the thing, misuse or abuse classified information, though it is unclear whether such provisions have been breached in this case. There's going to be an investigation probably. However, the salient point here is that they were using an app with disappearing messages, okay? A feature not available on secure governmental messaging systems where accountability is a priority. So the military, the government, and Wall Street, and the bodies that oversee and regulate and investigate them don't like disappearing messages because it's hard to look for fraud, accountability, deception, and all that. So join us tonight on State of Play to do a deep dive into this budding scandal and what it means for both the administration and, again, for Yemen and Gaza and the wider West Asian region. So I just want to say this for now, as someone who once held a top secret security clearance in special operations. If I had accidentally leaked classified information on a civilian messaging app to a journalist, no matter the circumstances, no matter if I was just incompetent and it was a complete accident, I'd have been fired and subjected to a military tribunal. That's a given. Dishonorably discharged at best and thrown into military prison at worst, which is the more likely scenario. But of course, there will be no accountability, which is one of the primary reasons to use a non-government messaging service in the first place. Also for convenience, which is precisely why Hillary Clinton used her own private email server, when she was Secretary of State. We'll get into that later. The hypocrisy, the rank incompetence, and a lack of accountability. Washington as usual. This is just a particularly embarrassing scandal. Also, increased militarism, sending another aircraft carrier strike group to the Middle East, also potentially sending U.S. troops to Israel in order to train the IDF in explosive ordnance disposal, i.e. to clear out all the bombs in Gaza. I've heard that from multiple sources, but we're still waiting on confirmation. So just saying that could be in the mix. If you see a headline in the coming days about U.S. troops deploying to Israel, don't freak out yet. We're still a long ways off from them being a combat role or even going into Gaza. But before we get into problematic journalists, sleazy politicians, warmongers, and a grifting media apparatus, I wanted to take a minute to recognize the passing of Hosam Shabat, a journalist who worked for Al Jazeera, Mubasher, who was killed in northern Gaza on Monday, March 24th, yesterday. Witnesses told the network that his car was targeted in the eastern part of Beit Lahia, and that is not being reported by the media, but it is all over social. And if you don't know who he is or was, yes, Hosam Shabat, 23-year-old journalist from Gaza, was threatened by Israeli forces to stop reporting on their activities in northern Gaza and delete his published work. And today, March 24th, again, yesterday, he was killed in a direct targeted strike. He had a following, and he wrote things such as, I'm going to read one of his posts. I couldn't pull it up because I couldn't find it on X, but I could find it on Instagram. Give me 1 second, looking for... Sorry, y'all. Yeah, so it's been one of the big stories. He was also affiliated with Drop Site News. And just to read one of the things he wrote, it's probably pretty profound. Quote, the biggest problem is not Western journalists being unable to enter, i.e. the Gaza Strip, but the fact that Western media doesn't respect and value Palestinian journalists. My colleagues and I risk our lives every day to report on this genocide. No one knows Gaza like we do, and no one understands the complexity of the situation like we do. If you care about what's happening in Gaza, you should amplify Palestinian voices. We don't need Western journalists to tell our stories. We're capable of telling and reporting on our own. Yeah, and that's precisely why they've been targeting over 200 journalists. It's precisely because, well, they don't want even Western journalists growing a conscience or a spine and reporting on those same stories. So we recognize his passing, and it's just another drop in the atrocity bucket that we will document and not forget. So Israel also just shelled a UN compound in Gaza last week, and in response, the UN is now reducing its presence in the Strip.
Has taken the difficult...
So this is Stefan Dujarric, United Nations spokesperson, and he is discussing the bombing of the UN compound. Excuse me, it was apparently a tank shelling of the compound.
The General has taken the difficult decision to reduce the United Nations footprint in Gaza, even as humanitarian needs soar and our concern over the protection of civilians intensifies. We are not leaving Gaza. I repeat, the United Nations is not leaving Gaza. Based on the information that is currently available, the strikes hitting a UN compound in Deir al-Balah on March 19th were caused by an Israeli tank shell. The strikes claimed the life of a UN colleague from Bulgaria and left 6 others from France, Moldova, North Macedonia, Palestine, and the United Kingdom with severe injuries, some of them life-altering. The location of this UN compound was well known to all the parties in the conflict, and I reiterate that all parties to the conflict are bound by international law to protect the inviolability of United Nations premises.
But we all know that that international law is now done in the post-October 7th era. Israel has, as a matter of state policy, made it a targeting priority to hit hospitals. In fact, a doctor that was just on a number of major news outlets, Western doctor, who said that over 100,000 children had been killed, which, we all believe, because Trump keeps saying that there's 1.9 million Palestinians in Gaza. So where did the other 300,000 go? It's because he's been briefed on the current population count. That's what we think. And also a lot of revered medical journals of long-standing and peer-reviewed have published articles about how, based off crude casualty counts, yes, that's consistent with what you'd see with this kind of ordinance dropped and this population density. So as we're seeing now, I don't know if you guys remember 2015 under Obama, the United States bombed a Doctors Without Borders hospital in the Kunduz province in Afghanistan. It was a massive scandal. It dominated the news cycle for weeks. And now we have reports that a hospital in Sana'a in Yemen has been bombed twice. And now bombing hospitals, which used to be a huge deal, even back during the global war on terror under Obama in 2015, now it's just not even making the news. So I said this at the beginning in November of 2003. Now that this has happened, now that they destroyed Al Shifa Hospital, it's forever normalized. Bombing a hospital will never be a news story again in the mainstream media. So that's what we're looking at now. But anyways, moving on. Also, in terms of Israeli aggression, 4 killed in Israeli strikes in Syria. IDF says terrorists shot at troops. As you know, they've expanded their buffer zone into southern Syria past their traditional occupation of the Golan. And the Israeli military claims it retaliated with artillery fire after armed militants attacked them in a village in southern Syria. According to local media, at least 10 were wounded in the Israeli attack that included tanks and aircraft. In the Koya village in Daraa region in southern Syria, which has always had clashes with the IDF, according to Syrian media outlets. More people, including a woman, were reported wounded. According to Haaretz, quote, sources who spoke with Syrian media said that many of the village residents left for nearby villages due to ongoing IDF attacks, with many residents fearing an Israeli invasion of Koya. Sorry if I'm butchering the pronunciation, guys. Continuing the quote, Jordan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs condemned the IDF's activity in Syria, calling it a flagrant violation of international law, a serious violation of Syria's sovereignty and unity, and a dangerous escalation that will only lead to more clashes and tensions in the region, unquote. And according to some pro-Syrian government reporting, I mentioned that here simply because I'd be surprised if the Syrian government, the current Syrian government, actually did anything substantive to resist Israeli encroachment. And we know that Jolani or Al-Shara or whatever you want to call him has made a statement asking the international community to condemn Israeli actions in Syria. But beyond that, you're not going to see anything more. I'd be surprised if you did. Be very happy to be wrong. So men from Daraa took matters into their own hands. And here's a video of the funeral service. I will transliterate. The people of Koya village bury their dead after they were targeted by Israeli occupation forces. This morning in Koya village, where the occupation tried to break into the city and its valley, as we can see, the funeral of 2 martyrs in the town of Koya in the Yarmouk Basin, West Daraa. Funerals being carried out in view of Israeli occupation forces, which are based in the Maria military unit. So now the violence is spreading to, and it has, I mean, there have been Syrian civilians killed in Israeli airstrikes as well. But now it's kind of flaring up. It seems like Israeli aggression has been empowered, as we saw last week with the resumption of airstrikes on Yemen, and it's only going to get worse. We are downhill with no brakes. However, this new development with the Signalgate is interesting, and we're going to wait to see if it has any impact on U.S. foreign policy. I doubt it, but we still have to talk about why it's important. And what they said in the Signal chat, we're going to look at some of the dialogue and kind of analyze it. And we can kind of grab some policy and make some policy determinations, especially with Yemen, based off it. What I will posit right now in my argument is that there will be no invasion of Yemen. They'll just intensify airstrikes. And they will attempt to, quote, reestablish freedom of navigation, because they know that invading Yemen right now is not an option. Sorry, my printer's like turning on for some reason. Hang on, hit the power button. Sorry about that, y'all. That was weird. Okay. So as Israeli aggression and atrocities continue in Gaza, the West Bank, southern Lebanon, and Syria. Let's take a moment to recognize that Jeffery Goldberg, the journalist who was accidentally, and I do believe it was an accident, as I said earlier, added to the Signal group of senior national security cabinet members planning an attack on the Houthi leadership in Yemen. He is a former Israeli soldier and prison guard at the notorious Kitzot prison. Again, my bad for the pronunciation, in the Nakab Desert, where he was complicit in the torture of Palestinians. Again, it's notorious. If you serve there, you're obviously, and you don't speak out, you're obviously complicit in that, although we don't know exactly what he did there. After his time as an occupation soldier, he stepped into journalism, all right, manufacturing consent for the Iraq War amongst the liberal elite, such as with such articles like The Great Terror, published in 2002 in the New Yorker, which describes a humanizing tale of Saddam's oppression of the Kurds, humanizing for the Kurds, in northern Iraq. Not something any reasonable person would deny, but you're about to notice a trend. And in case you guys want to see the actual article, I'll bring it up and we'll kind of look at it later. Like the New Yorker, The Atlantic is an elitist, liberal publication meant to manufacture consent for war amongst the liberal elite, which they've always been good at, them, New York Times, etc. So we'll look at that, but it is paywalled. However, there's been so much reporting on it that you don't really need to read it anymore in the first place. So as Roger Cohen, the former editor of the New York Times, put in 2009, let me just bring this up. I think he might have a bio in there. Anyways, yeah, Roger Cohen, former editor of the New York Times, put in 2009, Goldberg became, quote, Netanyahu's faithful stenographer. He is editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, which last summer published the article, The UN's Gaza Statistics Make No Sense by Graham Wood, claiming it is possible to kill children legally. There was a lot of backlash to that article, last summer or last year. And, instead, Goldberg didn't take the article down based off the blowback. He not only left it up, but he made it free to read. Again, Atlantic articles are usually paywalled, but he made that one free so everybody could read it. Almost unprecedented in the media outlet's history. He may be in the limelight now, but he is no objective or conscientious journalist to be celebrated. He's always been part of the war machine. He does access journalism. He posts what the elite, especially the liberal elite, want to be posted. He is a liberal Zionist, and he obviously favors the Democratic Party, and this is a huge boon to a flagging, wavering Democratic Party. He also sat on the story for 9 days after he exited the group chat. While he would open himself likely to prosecution if he had revealed the information before the strikes, which killed over 60 civilians, apparently hit a hospital twice. At least the first strike is confirmed. It is important to recognize that he supports any action which will benefit the Israeli state. That being said, let's get into media reactions, because this is the biggest scandal in years. And then we're going to get into what this means for policy going forward. So before we do, I would like to make 3 short paragraph points. All right. First, here, I would like to make, I'd like to invite you to keep in mind that according to Drop Site News, an unnamed insider claims that Michael Waltz, current national security advisor who replaced Jake Sullivan from the Biden administration, and he's an ex-Green Beret officer, which makes this even more embarrassing, had already leaked information and was leaking information, which is kind of standard procedure, to Jeffery Goldberg. And he most likely accidentally added him to the chat because he added him before to other chats. No way to confirm that as of right now, but according to Drop Site News, they have a source, deep background, that is saying that that's what happened. What makes this even more absurd is in the chat, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, and we'll look at the actual quote later, posted, quote, "I will do all we can do to enforce 100% OPSEC, unquote, operational security. No one thought to check, I guess, the random account that didn't declare itself. Whoops. All these members of the cabinet have gone through OPSEC briefs about how Signal is vulnerable. And the Pentagon just issued an unclassified memo, which means it goes out to everybody, because you don't need a security clearance to access it. Unclassified memo warning against the use of Signal. Quote, a vulnerability has been identified in the Signal messenger application. Begins the department-wide email dated March 18th, obtained by NPR. And this was after the Signal chat went into effect. But, these guys already knew that. Why you don't use unencrypted apps to discuss classified information, especially when we know they're vulnerable. You use a SCIF or a secured. Sorry, I'm mind blanking. It's a secured compartmentalized information facility. Secure compartmentalized informational facility. Someone can fact check me on the comments. I don't know why I'm mind blanking on that, but every one of these senior cabinet officials and even their deputies have them installed in their homes, and they can access them within 10 minutes. The one problem is if you use a SCIF, you do leave a footprint that you can't get rid of, because classified information and its transmission is tracked over official channels. So anyways, let's look at this Pentagon memo real quick. SCIFs, not all SCIFs are necessarily air gapped, which means they've never been connected to an outside network. That's different from SIPRNet. Okay, yes, I think SCIFs are air gapped, and they're generally for communication and the transmission of classified documents. The documents are, I believe, uploaded via hardware, and they exist on an air gap network. That's generally how it works. So anyways, here's the OPSEC security bulletin about Signal. And if you guys use Signal for your protest and activism activities, you may as well look at what the Pentagon is saying. All right. A vulnerability has been identified. And yes, this is F9T53 OPSEC special bulletin, Signal vulnerability. A vulnerability has been identified in the Signal messenger application. The use of Signal by common targets of surveillance and espionage activity has made the application a high-value target to intercept sensitive information. Russian professional hacking groups are employing, quote, linked devices feature to spy on encrypted conversations. The feature allows the chat and voice messenger application to be utilized on multiple devices concurrently. The hacking group's embedded malicious QR codes and phishing pages or conceal them in group invite links. I guess they all accepted a group invite link to this one. After gaining access via the malicious code, the groups add their own devices as a linked device. This allows the group to view every message sent by the unwitting user in real time, bypassing the end-to-end encryption. Steps to safeguard your Signal application are on the following pages. The pages are unclassified and can be printed for use outside of SCIF spaces. All right, so that's just something. I hope we can get access to what the next pages were, because I want those security protocols as well, because the U.S. government also tries to spy on on Signal groups as well, because drug runners use it, activists use it, potential agents also use it. So yeah, let's now that we've all established that and how big of a security breach this is, let's look at some media reactions and break it down. This is from last night, and then we're going to look at some from today real quick. Let's go.
To the White House now.
So if you're just listening to the audio, this is CBS News 24/7. This is from Saturdays at 7 a.m. East. Oh, okay. Yeah, Saturday night.
President Trump just held a meeting with his cabinet this afternoon. Also in attendance, Department of Government Efficiency head Elon Musk. This comes as concerns grow after a journalist was included in a group chat regarding attacks on Houthi rebels in Yemen. President Trump commented on it during a meeting with Louisiana's governor today. Take a listen.
Mr. President, your reaction to the story in The Atlantic that said that some of your top cabinet officials and aides had been discussing very sensitive material through Signal and included an Atlantic reporter for that. What is your response to that?
I don't know anything about it. I'm not a big fan of The Atlantic. To me, it's a magazine that's going out of business. I think it's not much of a magazine, but I know nothing about it.
I have no idea what my cabinet members are doing.
Saying that they had what?
They were using Signal to coordinate on sensitive materials and
having to do with what? Having to do with what? What were they talking about?
With the Houthis.
The Houthis? You mean the attack on the Houthis? Right. Well, it couldn't have been very effective because the attack was very effective. I can tell you that. I don't know anything about it. You're telling me about it for the first time.
CBS News White House reporter Olivia.
And real quick, I do want to talk about these attacks on the Houthis and them being really effective. We have spent, because of the Houthis, a ship hasn't been hit. A ship is probably not going to be hit by the Houthis, but what they have done is they've shut down shipping in the face of continual airstrikes, and they have cost the U.S. military over $1 billion in intercept missiles. The Intercept reported that, I believe. Over $1 billion, and we've expended more air defense missiles since the Houthis started shooting into the Red Sea than we have in the past 30 years, since the Gulf War. So, yeah.
Rinaldi joins us now. Olivia, do you know how that journalist got included in this really sensitive group chat?
Well, Liz, what a shocking report from The Atlantic today, sending ricochets around Washington that Jeffery Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, appears to have been accidentally included on a group chat with a lot of heavy hitters, including the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, National Security Advisor, the Vice President, Trump's Chief of Staff, on very sensitive plans to attack Houthi rebels in Yemen over the weekend. Now, this report was published today. Jeffery Goldberg was talking about exactly what transpired in that group chat, which was before the strikes happened, where we saw some conversation between the Vice President and the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, over whether or not they should postpone the strikes for a month or so. Also quite notable in that group chat, the Vice President appeared to criticize Trump and the administration, saying that there were some inconsistencies in the messaging around Europe, quoting from the piece now, which allegedly shows what the Vice President had said during that group chat. The Vice President said, quote, "I'm not sure the President is aware how inconsistent his message is on Europe. This is with his message on Europe right now." He says there's a further risk that we see a moderate to severe spike in oil prices as a result of these strikes. Now, we are hearing from the spokesperson of the National Security Council, who appears to confirm that these texts are authentic. In a statement to CBS News, he said, "At this time, the message thread that was reported appears to be authentic, and we are reviewing how an inadvertent number was added to the chain." He also said the thread is a demonstration of deep and thoughtful policy coordination between senior officials, putting a little bit of spin on there.
A little bit of spin. Look, we just had the biggest information breach scandal since even before Hillary's emails, which every one of these people was freaking out about, right? But yeah, it's just a really good demonstration of national security officials working together to accomplish the mission. So their kind of messaging is in free fall. I should also mention, before we move on, that according to Jeff Goldberg, who is, as much as he is a liberal Zionist, he is reliable in this case, that they did put classified information on there. They put strike times, strike packages, the equipment being used, when it was going to exactly happen, and what the targets were. He didn't publish that information because he didn't want to go to jail, but he says it was on there. So we'll have to keep that in mind.
Also in attendance, Department of Government Efficiency head Elon Musk. This comes.
Oh, sorry, I accidentally replayed that. So messaging's not great. They're kind of in free fall right now. This is incredible ineptitude, and we're going to see a suffering of military morale and military actions since then. This is Pete Hegseth's response. He is the one who allegedly, most likely, but still allegedly, posted classified information about the strike packages against the Houthis in the Signal chat.
Can you share how your information about war plans against the Houthis in Yemen was shared with a journalist in the Atlantic? And were those details classified?
You're talking about a deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's...
I mean, he's not, even though he's a warmonger and a propagandist, he's not a discredited or small-time journalist. That's insane.
Made a profession of peddling hoaxes time and time again, to include the hoaxes of Russia, or the fine people on both sides hoax, or suckers and losers hoax. So this is the guy that peddles in garbage. This is what he does. I would love to comment on the Houthi campaign because of the skill and courage of our troops. I've monitored it very closely from the beginning. And you see, we've been managing 4 years of deferred maintenance under the Trump administration. Our troops, our sailors were getting shot at as targets. Our ships couldn't sail through. And when they did shoot back, it was purely defensively or at shacks in Yemen. President Trump said, no more. We will reestablish deterrence. We will open freedom of navigation, and we will ultimately decimate the Houthis, which is exactly what we're doing as we speak from the beginning, overwhelmingly.
I just want to say, if you're just listening to the audio, he is very jumpy. His actions are really exaggerated. It looks like he's like nodding his head at the journalist, and yeah, he just looks very skittish.
Why were those details shared on Signal, and how did you learn that a journalist was privy to the targets, the types of weapons used?
I've heard I was characterized. Nobody was texting war plans, and that's all I have to say about that. Thank you.
That's it. All right. Well, there's going to be an investigation either way. So, and here is the hearing in front of the Select Intelligence Committee, Senate. Tulsi Gabbard, the director of the CIA, and others in attendance. And I'm not going to play the whole thing, but this was a grilling.
This signal chain that we have been...
Someone is like, Pete's angry, not skittish. I mean, he's deeply uncomfortable right now. I mean, everybody knows that this was a massive F up.
Talking about, was there any mention of a target?
I just have to address this. So Goldberg is an ex-IDF prison guard and torturer, and that's a liberal Zionist. Yeah, liberals can be just as big of war hawks as the far-right extremist conservatives, and especially when you're in an indoctrinated military system, I definitely see it happening. I know people who voted for Obama who consider themselves liberals and believe in, women's rights and LGBTQ plus people do interrogations of Al-Qaeda, Taliban, quote unquote suspects, and they were pretty brutal. So I definitely believe that's possible. But I just wanted to say that from my perspective, yeah, we can disagree, but I totally see that being the case because I've seen it with American troops personally. Okay, now back to the Select. Intel chiefs testify amid leak fallout. This is from the Fox News stream from earlier today, 11:42 Eastern time.
In the signal chain that we have been talking about, was there any mention of a target in Yemen?
This is Tulsi Gabbard replying.
I don't remember mention of specific targets.
Any generic target?
She has mastered the, this is just commentary, unprofessional commentary, but she has mastered the look of hand caught in the cookie jar.
I believe there was discussion around targets in general.
Mr. Ratcliffe.
I think that's consistent. with my recollection. Again, I don't have access to that.
Was there any mention, Ms. Gabbard, of a weapon or weapons system?
I don't recall specific weapons systems being named.
So these are really pointed questions because this is the most classified aspect. Like operations themselves aren't necessarily classified. How classification works, it's mostly like exact times, exact methods and weapons used. General stuff isn't as classified as specific. So the more specific it gets, the more classified it is. So this is why this Democratic senator is asking these really pointed questions. He's also a veteran as well.
I'm not talking about specific, any weapon or weapon system.
I don't recall specific names of systems or weapons being used.
It was the dog. Someone says, yeah. So that's what we're looking at. Now let's look at what was actually said in the article and spend the last portion of this. Now that we've kind of like set it up, how big of a catastrophe this is, how seriously people take this, except for Fox News. After we play this Fox News defense of it, just because we like to look at the other media landscapes here on Mint Press News, we're going to get into the actual article itself. So this is Fox.
Start a group text.
Waters. He's like one of the most prominent Fox News hosts, and yeah, it's bad. Their defense of the indefensible is kind of crazy.
Did you ever try to start a group text? You're adding people and you accidentally add the wrong person. All of a sudden, your Aunt Mary knows all your raunchy plans for the bachelor party.
Yeah, boys will be boys. This is the party of family values, by the way. And he thinks this is going to resonate with his audience.
Well, that kind of happened today with the Trump administration. Mike Waltz was putting together a group chat on Signal, an encrypted app, with the Secretary of Defense, the VP, and a bunch of other national security officials to collaborate on whether to strike Iranian proxies in Yemen who keep firing missiles and shutting down shipping. Well, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz accidentally added a reporter to the group text, and not a good reporter. Jeffery Goldberg from The Atlantic, one of the biggest hoax artists around. Well, he heard some things he probably shouldn't have, but
I mean, he's not wrong when he says he was doing a like hoaxes in terms of like atrocity propaganda, the same hoaxes that Fox News was doing, by the way.
Could have been a wee bit of a security breach, but it's not like they homebrewed a server and then bleached it or kept classified documents in their garages next to their Corvette.
No, they just kept classified documents at Mar-a-Lago in the bathroom like Trump was charged for.
I'm sure it won't happen again.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it won't happen again, too. So, whoopsie daisy. But in the meantime, I'm super glad it got leaked because now this will help us interpret Trump's foreign policy and the foreign policy that his staff is going for. So, first of all, we're not going to set it up. We're just going to go straight into the dialogue of this texting. So, here we go. So the Vance, this is gonna deal with Europe first. So the Vance Associated account goes on to make a noteworthy statement, considering that the vice president has not deviated publicly from Trump's position on virtually any issue. He says, "I'm not sure the president is aware how inconsistent this is with his message on Europe right now. There's a further risk that we see a moderate to severe spike in oil prices. I'm willing to support the consensus of the team to keep these concerns to myself, but there's a strong argument for delaying this a month, that being the strike, doing the messaging work on why this matters." Because again, when the Houthi strikes, the counter Houthi strikes happened, conservative TikTok and social media exploded, being like, why are we fighting this again? This is not what we voted for. Why are we sending more money to Israel? So yes, they do have a massive messaging problem. So yeah, in the course at 8:27, a message arrived from Pete Hegseth account. He says, "VP, I understand your concerns and fully support you raising this with POTUS. Important considerations, most of which are tough to know how they play out. Economy, Ukraine, peace, Gaza. I think messaging is going to be tough no matter what." Yeah, because you're supposed to be the anti-war candidate, and now you're bombing Yemen. Nobody knows who the Houthis are. this is kind of dumb because they've been all over the news for the past year and a half, 2 years. Okay. Like at this point, people kind of know who they are, which is why we need to stay focused on one, why Biden failed, and two, Iran funded. Of course, that's has been their messaging since the start. This has been no different. Iranian proxies are the biggest threat to world peace. And, we need to bomb Iran because of that. Their messaging isn't going to change, but I don't think he understands that this has been their messaging the entire time. But Hegseth message goes on to state, waiting a few weeks or a month does not fundamentally change the calculus. That's true. They've been doing bombing runs against the Houthis for how many months now, and they haven't stopped. So, okay, immediate risks on waiting, he says. One, this leaks and we look indecisive. Nope, this leaked and you guys look like idiots. Two, Israel takes action first or Gaza ceasefire falls apart, which happened right after these strikes happened, and we don't get to start on our own terms. Yes, you no longer get to start on your own terms. We can manage both. We are prepared to execute. If I have a final go or no vote, I believe we should. Hegseth continues, this is not about the Houthis. I see it as two things. One, restoring freedom of navigation, a core national interest. And of course, freedom of navigation is what we use to justify interventionist policies around the globe through our naval assets. And two, reestablish deterrence, which Biden cratered. So they think that they can bomb the Houthis into not shooting them anymore. And they think they can intimidate Iran enough to give nuclear concessions. Continuing, but we can early pause. And if we do, I will do all we can to enforce 100% OPSEC. I welcome other thoughts. Yeah, so that was kind of embarrassing. Mike Walsh, National Security Advisor, finally responds, whether it's now or several weeks from now, it will have to be the United States that reopens these shipping lanes. Per the president's request, we're working with the Department of Defense and state to determine how to compile the cost and levy them on the Europeans. Yeah, I think what they're definitely trying to go for here, and it's not stated in this text, is that they are trying to get Europe to pay for this operation in some way, because the shipping lanes through the Suez Canal affect Europe way more than the United States, but the United States is footing the bill for all these expensive maritime aerial operations. And then JD Vance responds, if you think we should do it, let's go. I just hate bailing Europe out again. The administration has argued that that America's European allies benefit economically from the U.S. Navy's protection of international shipping lanes. And then finally, VP, this is Pete Hegseth going, I fully share your loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic, but Mike is correct. We are the only ones on the planet who can do this. Nobody else even close. The question is timing. And yeah, so basically they don't have to worry about it because, their loathing of Europe and their reopening of shipping lanes isn't probably going to happen anytime soon. And now they're bogged down by this massive scandal. So it definitely does seem like a lot of them wanted the ceasefire in Gaza to hold. But of course, they're all established Zionists, so they can also not care at all as well. But yeah, so that's where we're at right now. And so they don't want to bail Europe out. Europe's affected by the shipping lanes, but they want the United States to retain deterrence that the U.S. Navy can protect shipping lanes no matter what. Therefore, we are the unipolar power. We are dominant, but it hasn't been working. The shipping lanes have been shut down. We've done more hard-hitting combat operations against the Houthis. They're still shutting ships down. We've expended over $1 billion in in air defense missiles, and now we're sending a total of 3 carrier groups to the Middle East. So the USS Carl Vinson apparently just anchored in Guam and is going to head over to Strait of Hormuz or the Gulf of Aden. And the USS Nimitz, the 3rd carrier, is currently undergoing repairs in San Diego, last I read. And that was of this morning. And then they're going to head to the Middle East. So 3 aircraft carriers, carrier strike groups in one single body of water is insane. There is some concern that they want to saturation bomb Houthis in Yemen in order to beat them into submission. This would be highly problematic for the United States, and especially a candidate who platformed on being anti-war. So we'll have to see how the United States public will tolerate this. Also, they're looking incredibly incompetent right now. Further military considerations with these operations is that now that they've breached operational security so badly, like I've talked to some people in the military, and I was in the military. It's really demoralizing when you have to go to seminars and take online classes about how to maintain operational security, take cyber awareness courses, especially when you have a top secret security clearance precisely so that doesn't happen, but you're mandated to do it. And if you don't do it and you mess up, you go to jail. But these guys are going to walk away scot-free, like the leading officials. That's not good for morale, and that's certainly not a good way to, help the recruiting crisis. When the SecDef is kind of a joke, like, do you want to join the military or stay in the military when this happens? Like, all of this is going to redound, and it's like part of like 1,000 pricks that start bleeding the beast out. So and this all goes back into Trump's Middle East foreign policy. So first of all, based off that, it seems like they wanted to, they were thinking about delaying this for a couple months, but the situation is intolerable. They want the trade lanes open. And the fact that they're even doing this is kind of indicative that a ground invasion seems very much unlikely. We said it from the start. The United States doesn't have the capacity to do that right now. Also, it would demoralize the military. People don't know why we would do that. So more bombing, more aid to Israel in the meantime. And of course, we'll continue to influence what's going on in Syria, the dismantling of the Palestinian resistance there, potentially in collusion with the government, the new government who is blocking aid to Hezbollah and reorienting the security situation in the refugee camps there. Yeah, and as well, the sustained bombing of the Gaza Strip, the continued annexation of the West Bank, and the assaults into southern Lebanon. Now, of course, we've talked about this before. Trump's entire foreign policy hinges on him trying to expand the Abraham Accords. If you recall, back in his first presidency, the Abraham Accords were how he normalized relationships between Bahrain, the UAE, and Israel, which means they were the first Arab countries to recognize that. Well, actually, Jordan did it a long time ago, but that's because Jordan had no choice. Beyond the scope of this conversation. But yeah, Bahrain, the UAE, to normalize with Israel, recognize its sovereignty, stop trade restrictions, and have full diplomatic communication and unfettered access. So he wants to do that for Lebanon. They're pressuring the Lebanese government to normalize with Israel. The United States is taking an unprecedented role in the internal politics of Lebanon. We've talked about this before ad nauseum. We know it's why they're building that massive monolithic embassy there. It's a statement of intent in Beirut. Then, of course, we've already heard reports and seen reporting on how the U.S. is pressuring Jolani or al-Shara's new government to normalize with Israel. That, I believe, and a lot of other analysts believe, that they will flip and turn into a comprador state in order to remain politically viable in West Asia. And then they're leaning on Iraq to also normalize with Israel. So what we're seeing, what Trump is trying to do is secure Israel by pushing for a pan-Arab Abraham Accord, where all the governments, all these like bourgeois monarchies that benefit off the U.S. imperialism will finally just get to a place where, hey, there's nothing standing in the way of U.S. intent and Israeli intent. And what are their own populations going to do about it? Nothing. So they'll try to push for full normalization in order to create the stable conditions for the IMEC corridor. So again, IMEC corridor. I'm going to pull this up real quick, just because, you know, it's something that we're doing to kind of isolate and compete with China. 1 second, sorry guys, I got to pull this up. I'm just going to use the Wikipedia definition because it's good enough. In case you're not, you know, tracking what this is. This is the India, Middle East, European Economic Corridor. So tenets of this, if we pull up the map and zoom in, these are the major players involved in the IMEC corridor. It's the U.S., Western Europe, or most of Western Europe. And the idea is for this economic corridor, which is going to compete with China's Belt and Road up here through Iran into Turkey into Europe. We're going to start off in Mumbai here. If you're going to zoom in a little bit more so you can see it better. Oh, no, that's all it's letting me do. So Mumbai on the eastern coast of India, put it on ships, go through UAE, into Saudi Arabia, across the Gulf states, through Jordan, ending off in the port of Haifa and Ascalon in Israel, shipping off into Europe. So that's the economic corridor that they want a more stable Middle East for, and a answer to the Palestinian question. And of course, it is to isolate Iran, break Russia from Iran, and isolate China and undermine their what would be their multipolar system of global infrastructure. So goes from normalization, IMEC corridor, China isolation. I mean, it's really complicated, but those are the main points of Trump's foreign policy. And the thing is, they're not even that different from Biden's policy. You know, Biden just wanted the war in Ukraine to go on, and Trump's actually not, you know, I think he's really fine with it, but he does pretend to be less hawkish about the war in Ukraine. So that's kind of what we're looking at, y'all. Yeah, and in the meantime, they're dealing with this massive scandal, which is in their first 100 days. The first 100 days of a presidency are like what establishes the momentum for the next 3 years, next like 3.5 years. And it's kind of devastating to have a scandal on this scale. We're going to see how it shakes out. But like this is going to dominate a lot of their media messaging about Doge, the cutting of federal programs. It's going to be hard to deal with. And it's kind of messy and it's not great for them, which I'm totally fine with, because why would you need another 2 aircraft carriers in West Asia? Like, just stop. So if you can get bogged down and it can somehow influence your foreign policy to be less hawkish and alienate people, well, I'm totally fine with that. All right, so let's dump some questions in here. I kind of went a little over because there's a lot to cover, but yeah, let's see what we got. Okay. Ooh, okay, cool. Good question. What are your thoughts on Israel's security meeting over Turkey's involvement in Syria? Okay, so there's a couple meetings that I'm tracking. First of all, I know that you know, Turkey is seeking U.S. sanctions relief and warmer ties in Washington visit. There's a longstanding history of like us sanctioning Turkey, and a lot of the big things about our sanctions is like they're geared towards like military aspects. Like they want us to lift sanctions in order to let the country back into a crucial fighter jet program. We have sanctions on their fighter jets, and you know, the ties between U.S. and Turkey have drifted away from a strategic partnership in recent years because like disagreements between the two long-standing allies have widened. So, yeah, I'm not sure what this has to do with the Syria policy. Sorry, I've been focusing so much on the Signalgate and the specifics of the U.S. fleet action in Yemen. Let me circle back on that, and I'll make some posts. But yeah, Turkey definitely wants to have better relationships with the United States. All right, Clara, what happens when the second coming isn't coming because no one thinks this is any form of reality? Yeah. Is this a theological question? Because I'm very, very secular. But I just feel like everything that's going on right now, if you what you mean by the second coming is the second coming of Jesus Christ, I feel like you'd be pissed. So um yeah, next question. De El Sendero. Yeah, looking really rough for the resistance right now. Yeah. This is the whole thing that's difficult about talking about Syria, right? Just is because Assad was a bourgeois dictator and he didn't really do anything to help the resistance, and he oppressed a lot of his population and people hated him for really legitimate reasons. But on the same token, he did let arms and intelligence through. He also, like any other authoritarian regime, controlled his own drug trade, and if they helped out with that, that's fine by him. But yeah, since the collapse of that, it's isolated Hezbollah. They will lacking in intelligence and actual replenishment arms and rockets that they were getting through the border, and yeah, they're getting choked off and isolated. Also, the government is, and the people who are anti-Hezbollah in Syria are waging an information war, saying that Hezbollah came across the border a couple weeks ago, killed 3 soldiers, and are basically trying to start a war, which isn't true. They're just trying to manufacture consent for more actions against Hezbollah, so they're hurting. Yemen. One of the reasons that they're sending another carrier fleet group, or 3 carrier fleet groups, is to control and patrol the entire Strait of Hormuz in any way that Iran is shipping weapons or electronics or avionics to Yemen, because Yemen doesn't have a strong electronics or avionics industry. Like they can construct rockets, we believe, but yeah, the precision gear, the precision equipment is coming from Iran. So what the U.S. Navy's tactical or strategic objective is going to be is to degrade the leadership networks, destroy their supply caches, all right, and then roll up their supply lines, choke off their supply lines. So these carrier strike groups aren't necessarily for bombing Yemen. They're for creating a deafening or a smothering, impenetrable wall of naval checkpoints and customs enforcement, essentially. So yeah, they're literally trying to choke off every viable resistance network. And then, of course, the U.S. government has warned Iraq that there will be strikes inside of their territory if Kataib Hezbollah or the popular mobilization units in Iraq in any way retaliate against U.S. bases for military actions against Yemen and the Houthis. So yeah, Iraq's in play too in terms of getting threatened at the very least. Like if Iran wants to supply popular mobilization forces in Iraq, there's nothing the U.S. military can do or anyone can do to stop it, because Iran and Iraq have a very large, unsecurable border that you'll never be able to police ever. So the most you can do is threaten their government to police it for us. And so that's what we're seeing. Yeah, basically the military, we talked about the political strategy here, but the military strategy is to cut off, isolate, and smother every resistance faction. So it's looking pretty bleak. I'm not sure how it's going to work, but yeah, it's going to be like the Dark Night of the Soul before like Act 3. We're looking at Empire Strikes Back right now. But I mean, Hezbollah hasn't gone anywhere. The Houthis have been bombed since 2014, and I don't know how you deal with the other elements that are in play. So yeah, they'll try it. They'll spend a lot of money trying it. They'll drop a lot of bombs trying it, but I don't see how it works. And in the meantime, they've still got this this massive scandal. Wow. Okay. Well, it looks like an hour passed really quick. At least it did for me. So I think we have to wrap it there. We are out of time, and out of questions as well. So I hope this was informative and helpful for y'all. And great seeing you always. And we will see you here on Mint Press News next Monday or next Tuesday. We'll keep you updated and see you then. Cheers, y'all.